So welcome tonight to our What You Didn't Realize You Didn't Know, OSHA, which is part 3 of our series. I'd like to introduce Steve Zimmerscheid as our moderator this evening. Steve, it's all yours.
Yeah, hey, good evening. How you doing, everybody?
Hi, Steve.
Hi there. How you doing, Kate?
I'm Shannon.
Hi, Shannon. Yeah, I see Kate on the screen, so don't mind me. So we're gonna,
You can call me Kate. That's okay.
It sets the tone for a very casual conversation tonight. That's what we're gonna do, right? So, so thank you, Sarah, for that. Appreciate that. We have Alan Amber, we have Josh Wilson, we have, of course, Shannon Dennis and the team on there from that perspective. We're gonna talk about OSHA, and we're gonna, I've got questions submitted. We're gonna pose the questions. We're gonna let we'll call the subject matter experts, the panelists, provide their insight, their detail on, and their expertise on these areas. Some of the questions could be legal, it could be safety, certification. So we'll let the right individual just kind of step up and answer the question. But before we do that, real quickly, a little trivia pursuit. If you didn't know, so trivia pursuit question, who founded and what year was OSHA founded? I had to look it up myself. So Richard Nixon, so everybody can confirm this, hopefully it's right, but Richard Nixon founded OSHA in 1971. And so I'm not going to claim to be the expert, but I will claim to know that. I guess we'll start off with that from that perspective as well. So before we start, I'd like to go around the horn here and have Josh, followed by Alan, and we'll close it up at the end here and give us an update on who you are, what your background is, and what you bring to the table. So Josh, I'll start with you, if you don't mind. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I certainly appreciate the opportunity to join in and hopefully provide a little insight on the legal aspect of this. But my name is Josh Wilson. I'm an attorney here in Nashville, Tennessee, with the law firm of Manier and Herod. I practice in a lot of different areas, mainly litigation areas. I practice OSHA compliance issues, employment law, do some entertainment litigation as well. A lot of the OSHA issues that I get involved with are on the employment side. There's a lot of OSHA is very broad and covers a lot of different retaliation issues, but those also all revolve around safety, usually safety complaints and things of that nature. So I'm happy to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
All right. Well, thank you, Josh. Alan, if you don't mind, next, if you mind, just give us the background, what you bring to the table.
Certainly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hello to everyone. I appreciate the opportunity. It's good to meet all of you. And apparently, I'm more into the Halloween spirit than everyone with my little darkened room, but I guess I'm new to Zoom to work on the video portion of it. I've been in the environmental health and safety field for over 40 years, and I represent tonight the practicality of putting these things together and living it for 40 years, developing programs, working with OSHA, watching them come into my facilities. I've worked in the automotive business. I'm talking to you from Michigan. So I've worked at the corporate offices of Ford Motor Company, putting together health and safety programs and environmental programs. I've worked for the tier 1 suppliers. I've also worked in the food and beverage business and done some consulting work. So I've seen a lot of things, and hopefully we'll be able to give you some perspective on dealing with OSHA and not feeling scared or worried about it, but moving forward and making it a positive case for making things better for your people.
Right. Well, thank you, Alan. Appreciate that. Shannon.
Hi. Much like Alan, I've spent many years, 25 plus, in the safety industry, primarily as a safety consultant and a trainer. I used to teach at the OSHA OTI Institute in Alabama, and I've been with Burmac for about 5 years. We consult with clients after there's been injuries, fatalities. We help with their OSHA abatement process and just help them through everything with the programs and what they need to do, safety management, all things OSHA. I'm also an OSHA trainer for construction and general industry both. And we work across a multitude of industries: construction, heavy industrial, sawmills, food processing plants, just to name a few. Also some automotive manufacturers as well.
Okay. Ford. I'm a Ford guy, so I'll throw it in there so as well, which is kind of nice. But all right. Well, thank you too as well. Appreciate it. Again, I know this is really my first time meeting the folks on the panel here, so thank you very much for your time. I know we appreciate it. UASA appreciates that as well too. A kind, small reminder, it is a virtual happy hour. So if you have tea, coffee, maybe some wine, whatever's working for you, go ahead and enjoy that too as well. I'm going to go through the questions here, in no particular order of ranking or importance, and I'll read it off. And I think whoever is best suited to take the initiative and answer the question, go for it. Okay. So again, the first one. So what is OSHA and who governs it is the first question that pops up. So what is OSHA and who governs it?
Josh, you want to take that one?
Well, sure. Yeah. So OSHA is an organization that's part of the Department of Labor. It's a governmental organization. It's a federal organization. And there's also states that have state OSHA organizations as well. There's 22 states that have their own OSHA regulations. The thing about those is that if you have your own state regulations, they actually have to be more strict than the federal OSHA regulations. Otherwise, any state would fall under the regular OSHA regulations. To me, OSHA is one of the broadest federal organizations that exists because it covers pretty much every business, every industry that's out there. Although it covers those, they're not really focused on all of the areas. I'd say certainly the focus is on industrial companies, businesses, manufacturing, machinery, heavy machinery, and those type things. I think that's where you see a lot of the OSHA investigations and safety issues. But OSHA actually has authority and regulation to cover pretty much any industry as long as the employers have 10 employees. So it's a really broad organization, like I said, and it covers so many different areas. As I briefly mentioned, and we may cover this a little bit or not, it also covers retaliation for whistleblowers. So there's about 20 or so different acts that OSHA is responsible for, such as the Clean Air Act, things like that any whistleblower who complains about certain safety regulations is protected from retaliation. So it's very broad. It even covers the Tax Fairness Act and things. So if people complain about companies not filing their taxes correctly and things like that, that always goes to OSHA. So as I said, it's really extremely broad, and there's a lot to it. Their general authority is to make sure that there's a safe work environment, and that's what their goal is to do.
Right. Well, thank you, Josh. So it sounds like federal is the umbrella, but then 22 states kind of run their own little, we'll call it their show, but it could be more, typically it's more stricter than the umbrella federal. The state is a little tighter from their policies or procedures, what I'm hearing as well.
Yeah, that's generally correct. I think generally most of the time they follow the same protocols. I think when you get in certain states that may have different environmental concerns, I think that's usually when you kind of find a state that may enact their own OSHA-related statutes.
Okay.
There's subtleties. There's subtleties. For instance, fall protection is typically begins at the 4-foot level. In California, it's a little lower. So there's little subtleties. In Michigan, where I'm from, they have a regulation that the feds don't have that has to do with injection machines. And so there's you have to take a look at the websites in your state for your local authority and take a peek and see where the differences are.
Yeah, I think it'd be important too when we respond to these, just thinking out loud, because the audience, they're small, medium, large, we'll call it business owners and employees. They're in-home service providers that have buildings, facilities, they drive vehicles around. So they're doing some interesting things out there. So I don't know if it all applies here, but I'd love to be able to kind of focus our responses to this industry, which I think that makes the most sense. They get the most value out of this conversation as well too. So appreciate that. Thanks, Josh. Thanks, Alan. So what or who is not covered by OSHA would be a question posed. So what or who is not covered by OSHA? you said pretty much everything, but is there anything that's not covered by OSHA? I think
Self-employed and family members on farms.
And minors.
And minors, if there's another regulation, like there's a mining regulation, that MSHA, the mining safety regulations, would take precedent. So
In your industry of in-service appliance repair, there are no exemptions, So if you're 10 or more, then you should be record keeping. 10 or less, and record keeping is not required.
The only ones that would not be covered is a self-employed person if it's just them. Once you have one or more,
Right.
you're covered.
So self-employed, one or more, but if you're not self-employed, it's 10 or more when OSHA kicks in. So there's
No, OSHA kicks in as long as you have one employee.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
The record keeping requirement does not kick in until you have 10 or more.
Okay. All right. Thanks for that clarification, Shannon.
And then certain programs that, like your emergency action plan, doesn't have to be in writing until you have 10 or more employees.
And Steve, I'm going to jump in real quick to give a question. Shannon, if it's one or more employee, does it matter if they're family or not?
Only
so if it's you and your spouse and like 3, I don't know, siblings, cousins that work there, does that matter?
Only under the agriculture standard. If you give birth to all of your employees, you are not covered by OSHA under the agriculture standard, but any other industry you are.
farming.
Yeah.
So farming. Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Sarah. Do employee numbers come into play when talking about OSHA requirements? I think we just pretty much answered 2 questions at the same time, so thank you for that. We're knocking it out of the park here for sure already. If we are asked to undergo an inspection by OSHA, is this normally due to an infraction reporting, or can the inspection be random? So did somebody report something, or is it a random inspection from an OSHA perspective?
Both.
Actually, both.
So both.
Kate, do you want to take that?
I'm sure the inspection priorities, it depends on what's going on that day. But so OSHA can come out for a multitude of reasons. Their first priority is injuries and fatalities that have been reported. And so that would be fatality, an injury that causes a hospitalization, amputation, or loss of an eye. There's going to be a follow-up by OSHA for that. All employee complaints are followed up by OSHA. Sometimes that's by a letter. It's not always by an in-person visit. The next priority would be there are random inspections, and then there's also follow-up inspections. Typically, the random inspections focus on high hazard industries. So again, heating and air equipment repairs is probably, most likely they're going to receive a visit if you've had a severe accident or an employee complaint would be the 2 reasons you would most likely see an inspector. And then there are other priorities. There are some national emphasis and local emphasis programs that you can look up on the websites. So people that use forklifts, sometimes hearing conservation, just kind of depends on what's going on. When the silica standard changed, there was a big emphasis program for a while on silica monitoring. So it really just kind of depends on what's going on in each area. But again, the 2 main reasons would be an injury or an employee complaint.
So let's say it's a random inspection. We use the term random. Is there a time notice, a 30-day notice before they come out, or is it on the spot? They walk in and do an inspection, or
no notice, no advance?
No, the fun part is they knock on your door.
Okay.
Show their badge.
Okay. All right.
I certainly think there's areas that there's more of a focus on than others. I mean, I certainly think in the manufacturing sector, especially places where there could be, environmental issues with the air and things like that, I think they're going to be more focused on doing random inspections in those type places. Hearing, as Shannon said, is an issue. So maybe if you're working at a big, facility where they're covering, where there's diesel fumes in the air, things like that, or other fumes like that, then I think you're more likely to have a random inspection in those type places than say you're running the mill retail store, things like that.
Makes sense.
Josh, are there any ramifications, or like does the owner or the manager have any legal ramifications to not allow this inspection, or do they have to? And it's kind of you have to do it, or
Yeah, I mean, generally you're going to have to do it. I mean, I think if you don't allow it, they're going to get the authority to come in there later and do it if for some reason you try to lock them out or something. So certainly, as long as it's covered, which pretty much everybody's covered, you're going to have to allow the inspection.
Right, and you do have a right to request them to get a search warrant, and they'll go get one and come back with, vengeance sometimes.
Right.
Right.
I want
Well,
you angry.
In most cases, it's good. It's not a matter,
That will they come, but it's a matter of when they'll show up. And you should have a feeling that that there's some programs that back you up, and that you feel good about the health and safety of your employees.
Right. Thank you. And the good news is we're answering questions too. There's some of them that are already outlined, you've already answered, which is great. So what are your rights when going through this? Should we take any steps once notified of an inspection? I think we kind of walked through that as well too, as far as your rights. The rights are really you let them in and do their inspection. What are the rights? Maybe Josh, are there rights outside of, hey, come on in and do your thing? What would you recommend? You walk with them? You have HR involved, safety involved? How does that process look like? If you have a random knock on the door, what are your rights as a business owner?
Sure. You have a right to have a representative to go through the walkthrough with them. That's something that's very important, and that's certainly something I would advise. You have a right to sort of have like a informal meeting with them at first to kind of go over, find out what they're there for, and kind of get kind of an overview of what they're going to be looking at. So that's two things that I would certainly want to advise anyone doing if they did show up randomly.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. You want to make sure you totally understand why they're there. And I've had instances where they've
come for a national emphasis program that had no, bearing to what my company was doing. So they'd say thank you and see you later. If it's a complaint, if it's an emphasis or it's a general inspection, you typically want to make sure that you know what they want to see and that you take them directly to where they want to go and not necessarily hopscotch around your facility. So that's very important. And I also would suggest that if they come do an inspection, you not let them wait for a long time, and you try to contact the influential people, the owners, to make sure that they know. But then when you're going around on an inspection, you make sure that not only are you there, but there's someone there who's taking notes, taking pictures, because the inspector typically, if he sees something, might want to take a picture, even videos. And you'd like to make sure you have a good record of that, just to make sure that if things escalate beyond that, that you have a good record of what's going on. This now really starts to fall more into Josh's world in terms of making sure you have good documentation.
Well,
Steve, I'm gonna jump in again.
Please do.
How does this apply to our industry, where most of the work is performed in an individual customer's home? And when we're going into someone's home, not necessarily working at the shop or the office doing the physical aspects. I mean, we have office staff and admin, but the physical work is in someone's home. Do we show them something like that, or do you send them there? How does that work? How does that apply?
Good question.
I would think that in most cases that wouldn't apply unless something serious happened, like a fatality, that there'd be an investigation.
But in most cases, it would be them knocking at your door at your facility to inspect your facilities. If you have a machine, I don't know if you guys have machine rooms, but if you have fleet and you do any warehousing, there may be an instance to walk around those places in your facility.
yeah, I think as we kind of talked about earlier, I think it'd be pretty rare for anything to happen unless maybe there was an injury in the home to an employee, or I guess possibly even to the person you're servicing, the homeowner. If you've got a team working there and maybe you've got a track record of injuries and things like that, I think that's a situation where you're more likely to maybe have them come involved. But I think it'd be very, very unlikely to have OSHA involved on a typical repair type job that you'd be doing.
So, this is not a question that's on the list, so I'll just throw it out there. But since we're talking about in-home and with everything going on in the world, I mean, with remote workforce, whether it's salary, non-salary, you're in the home doing things from a company perspective, company equipment. Is there anything OSHA that would apply towards a at-home office and how you do your work and what you do? Is there anything that's going to be that ties into OSHA, I guess, going forward with the whole remote workforce and increase in that? Maybe it doesn't apply or does, I don't know.
Well, for a home office, if you're talking about that, I mean, the whole purpose of OSHA is to make sure that employers provide a safe working environment for their people. So if something happened potentially in your home, they would, and let's say I'm the employee and I'm complaining about something, I'm pissed off, and I send OSHA a note saying that my company doesn't care, and there's something bad in my house. They may end up going to the company office to investigate it, from whatever I've said, and have the company respond to it there.
Yeah, I'm sure there's others that
remote.
Yeah,
That's
Josh,
typically remote.
Okay, so Josh.
It would be very unlikely that someone would come to a home, an OSHA,
Yeah.
come to someone's
Yeah,
home.
I think
You do
Alan
have to
kind of.
accept some injuries though. If you were injured, like you tripped over a file cabinet and broke an ankle, that could still be an OSHA recordable,
Right.
Yes.
even from a home office.
I think Alan sort of nailed it, because saying that it's really the focus is for the employer to provide a safe working environment. I think in most situations, people working at home, you're sort of by yourself working at home. You don't necessarily have a team working at home. You're not really having employees come in and work under you. I think that's what they're concerned about, making sure that wherever the employer is bringing in people, most of the time numerous people, that's where the concern is, to make sure the environment's safe there. Not necessarily a person working at home who trips and falls.
So if you forecast, I'm just throwing numbers out, 3 to 5 or so years, and the workforce changes and shifts dramatically from at work to at home work, do you foresee any changes in the state laws, not maybe the federal one, but the state one on those 22 you mentioned, or others? Do they get a little bit more aggressive on remote or not? Maybe I'm just throwing this out because you can see that workforce is increasing. So is there going to be something that changes? I guess I'm throwing it out there.
To me, I see that more of kind of a workers' comp type issue. So
Okay.
like, let's say you're working at home and you get injured, was it because you were working, or was it because you were not working and you were in your garden and you fell? I think that's kind of what, I don't really see it being an OSHA issue much. I mean, Alan or Shannon may be able to think of how that may apply down the road a little bit more than I, but I don't really see a major issue there. And certainly the work environment's changing, and I'm sure it will continue, but I don't know that will be a big focus.
Okay.
States typically take the lead from the feds, so if the feds are working on a program, they may, jump in, like, for instance, California likes to lead the country. I think they have an ergonomics program that the feds haven't been able to do much with. But typically the states. And I don't think that there's a lot more hazards going on than, what you face in your house. So I think the focus is on those kinds of things first.
Okay.
Hazards.
Right. Makes sense. All right. Thank you. Appreciate that feedback. So when employees are injured and require a hospital visit, what steps should an owner take, and what is the time frame for these steps? So for an injury at a hospital, I'll read the question again. So when employees are injured and require a hospital visit, what steps should the owner take, and what time frame should those be taken in?
As per OSHA, if they are admitted to the hospital, which means they are admitted, they're there more than 24 hours, then they have to notify OSHA within 24 hours. If they just go in for diagnostics and they're released, then it would just fall into the normal record keeping. and wouldn't be a self-reportable. And then they would just need to follow their workman's comp procedures and of course record that on the OSHA log if it meets the requirements for recordability.
Okay. So time frame really I mean, there's probably local ordinances, but is there a time frame that those need to be documented?
Typically 24 hours.
24.
24, thank you.
Certainly, you should document, the event, find out what happened, take statements, make sure you have an understanding of how the injury took place.
Exactly.
And get as much information as you can. If there was a part that someone was injured on, you probably need to save that and just kind of take those precautions for future reference when they do an investigation.
Now, if there's a fatality, OSHA has to be notified within 8 hours.
Okay.
Companies that have,
More mature program have an incident management system, where there's forms to fill out and certain things to do, pictures to be taken, and you do an internal investigation. For with mature programs, they do things for near misses, like I almost got hurt, but I didn't. And so to get to that magic number for companies sometimes, which is the 0 accidents, or working, for 1 million hours without a lost time injury. And we haven't defined those terms. And I don't know if everybody's comfortable with that. But typically there is a process. And I would recommend that your members should, at least have a process that, what do I do when somebody gets hurt? So they know what to do. And especially since they're on the road when they're doing it and typically not in a facility, that makes it perhaps even a little bit more daunting and makes it perhaps more important to make sure that, everybody knows what's happening, a number to call in. There's some of your insurance companies now have triage capabilities where there's a 24-hour nurse that if an employee gets hurt, and I've used these before in my past, but if an employee gets hurt, they call a number, and that nurse is linked to take all the detailed information and set things in order for things to happen. To file a workers' comp case, to make sure the employee, first of all, is taken care of if he needs medical care, and on and on.
So, Alan, you mentioned a process or a form. Is there again, related to the appliance service and parts industry, is there a consistent kind of step-by-step, here's what you do, the number to call? I know it's probably state by state, but is there a consistent form that would be looked at or considered, or is it available on the website for these business owners to follow, or is it all individual?
Well, certainly the I'm sorry for let me say this first, and I'll be quiet, but certainly the association could create things that would be helpful to their members and create something that they could basically take and make to their own. But at this point, it's easy to find those things. OSHA probably has their examples, or your individual state, or your workers' comp insurance company may have those things to help you develop those things.
Okay. Shannon, did you want to say something?
I was just going to say some basic templates that could be modified. There's several available. There are some things on the OSHA website as well. When you get into your record keeping forms, one of the forms is where you detail the injuries, and then you add them to your counts and your summary for the year. Those are all good places to start, but if your organization put together some basic templates, I'm sure it would be a nice thing. We've put together programs for some HVAC companies before where we detail all of that. So, and it's recommended that they all have safety programs.
All right.
Now with, carrying an iPad or even a cell phone, they can start that process from their service trucks, take photographs, and begin the incident investigation on site.
All right. Let's see here. So and I'm just going with the next question. If an employee chooses to ignore the policy and does not follow the guidelines and is injured, is this the employee's responsibility to OSHA, or is it the business? So employee chooses to ignore the policy. The policy is shared to the team. The individual, whatever, this is the question comes up, ignores the policy, does not follow the guidelines. Something happens. Who's responsible? The OSHA side of it, or is it the business's responsibility? I think I have the answer, but I'm going to throw it out to you.
Well, I think this is kind of an area where record keeping and doing what I was talking about a minute ago comes into play, and investigating and finding out what happened. If you believe that it was the employee's misconduct, that's certainly a defense the employer would want to use to help the company from getting any penalties and things of that nature. They would need to be able to show that the employee, did something wrong. Maybe it was using drugs or alcohol. Maybe it was not following the rules. That's why it's always important to have written rules. If you have written rules, it's clear. It's a lot easier to look at and say, hey, this guy wasn't following the rule. He was not in the place he was supposed to be at, and that's why he got hurt. He wasn't working in the time he was supposed to be working, things of that nature. And so if you could show that and show that it was employee misconduct, then it really falls on the employee, not necessarily the employer.
I think that's an interesting question and comment. Go ahead, Alan.
That typically falls in the workers' comp.
Ruling, and that's again a local thing also, and jurisdictions are different in how they handle workers' comp. But it happens a lot that an employee doesn't think they got hurt, but then 3 months later they remember, because their back is hurting them, that, oh yeah, I was lifting that refrigerator to get it out of that house, remember? And that's what's caused it. And that typically, then starts the clock going for making sure you get, enough information. And workers' comp then does their own investigation also, and then it falls on its merit. But those are it's an ugly system, and it never turns out pretty.
Well, I've heard workman's comp today a couple times tonight, and I've heard OSHA a couple times. How do you, right. Maybe this is me asking a basic question, but how do you decipher between a workman's comp case and an OSHA case? Maybe it's real simple, but if you can walk us through that.
Somewhat before, OSHA expects you to have the safety programs in place to prevent the accident. But once you do have an accident, the rules basically fall, and Josh can probably explain this way better than I, but then workers' comp basically takes over. But that doesn't mean OSHA comes back to evaluate and says, well, you didn't train your employees, you didn't have this program, and you get fined on top of it. So you get a double whammy.
Yeah, I think that's right. They can overlap, but they also kind of take divergent paths as well. I mean, the OSHA issue is going to be the focus of what the employer did. Was it a safe environment? If it wasn't, maybe the employer gets penalized. Maybe they're subject to penalties. But on the workers' comp case, that's all about the employee's injury. How is the employee injured? What's the extent of his injury? Was it in the workplace, and that kind of thing. And so they kind of diverge at that point, and that way you get into the legal process. Every state's a little bit different. Like here in Tennessee, we actually took workers' comp out of the court, and now it's still in court, but it's not subject to jury trials and things like that. So it's a little bit different. Every state's a little bit different, but the focus on the workers' comp is the employee's injury, not so much did the employer provide a safe working place.
And kind of going back to a couple of the other questions and responses, we've heard logging and documenting information, we'll call it. And I know it sounds pretty basic and pretty simple, but we want to make sure we understand. And sometimes getting the basics is a good thing for the audience. But what are we documenting, and how are we logging this information, and in what form, in what format? Does that make sense?
OSHA, there's an OSHA record keeping standard that has to be followed. And under that OSHA record keeping standard, again, if you have 10 or more employees, you're required to document your injuries and different things. So you can have things that are workman's comp cases. Maybe somebody has a minor injury where they have a first aid that's not actually an OSHA recordable. So there's different requirements that make it meet an OSHA recordable, and you have to document that. And then that's now is submitted for employers that had, and it wouldn't apply to you guys because I'm assuming most of your companies don't have more than 250 employees, are required to submit electronic OSHA logs, over 250 employees, and then special high hazard industries. So some of them may fall in there as a high hazard industry.
So again, I'm just an Excel spreadsheet. Is it posted somewhere? Or is it
on the OSHA website? It's called the OSHA 300, 300A, and the summary. And again, within 7 days of an injury, that incident should be logged on the OSHA log. And that's going to be anything that takes somebody days away from work. If they have a reduced capacity, then they can have days away, reduced time, or you would also record things like hearing loss, illnesses, things like that also go on your OSHA log.
Yeah, there's 3 ways to look at an injury, I guess, in terms of classifying, what happened. So a person gets injured and I can't come back to work. That's considered lost time. So
then I get injured. I can come back to work, but I can't do the normal functions of my job. That's restricted time. And those are 2 injuries that have to go on your OSHA log within 7 days, as Shannon said. And the third is if I get more than first aid treatment, and that's it's kind of a crazy, but more than first aid, I can come to work. For instance, stitches. I get cut, have to go and get stitches. That becomes an injury. I can still do my job. I haven't lost any time, but it's more than what OSHA would define as first aid. So that also, and it gets a little complicated, but OSHA in their infinite wisdom on some of their documents for their OSHA log somewhat explains what more than first aid is in examples, and they have that readily available. Did I muck that up?
We're going through these pretty quickly, which is nice. Can a company prevent an inspector from speaking with employees that are not involved in the accident?
No.
So yeah, that's a quick one. That was easy.
I will say, I think that's the correct answer, obviously, but I think that's when we talked about earlier, when you have this initial conference, I think that's your opportunity to sort of limit the scope of things and say, this person was not involved. There's no need to talk to them. But
right.
They can talk to whoever they want typically. And if it's supervisory, then
you get to potentially talk to your supervisors to find out what kind of questions. But if they talk to an employee, you don't have any rights to go to that employee and bug them to find out what was said in that private room, and that they get to talk privately. And typically, if it's an interesting, the worse the injury, the more the inspector wants to get a feel for what the employees know, and if they're having training, or if there's a plan or program that help them understand, if there's any relevance to the injury.
Hey, Steve, can I jump in real quick?
Oh, anytime you want, Sarah. You never have to ask me.
I'm just reading questions. I'm reading questions as they're submitted.
Perfect.
Is there a checklist somewhere of documentation that should be maintained so people, like Shannon, if we go to the OSHA website, like you said, is there a checklist of, I need to make sure this, and this is done, or is it just kind of your best guess?
It's a lot. There's a lot of information to sift through. It's the regulations that would be, you would probably need some guidance in kind of going through those and which ones actually apply to the specific industry. So I don't know that there's one checklist that's going to tell you every program that you need. There are, the OSHA 2254 tells you your training requirements, and so that's a good one to reference. Two of the main things that are going to help keep you out of trouble is if you can document training and you can document inspections of your equipment. Those are 2 things that OSHA really likes to see. And then of course written programs. And so for your guys, it's going to be hand and power tools. If they're working on roofs, it's just mainly residential atmosphere.
Residential and commercial, but yeah, it's more appliances, not really. I mean, we have some that do HVAC, but it's appliances.
So mainly indoors. So yeah, so electrical safety. And to be honest, your biggest hazards are on the road for your crews as being an
right, fleet management.
that's your number one.
My freebie for the night is and I don't have the site, but we can get it to you. There's a document on OSHA that OSHA has. It's a small business guide to OSHA. Is a really good go-to that talks about what a health and safety program should be, but it also identifies all the different areas, the programs that OSHA looks at, and gives you an opportunity to basically quickly go through it and see what may be relevant to you.
Okay, so with that said, are there OSHA training videos that, companies can download to view and train their employees on this, or is it all, again, kind of, you have to do it yourself?
No, there's all kinds of information available these times. Certainly, Shannon offers that as a service to do in-house training. And you to give her a plug, you get more specifics to what the industry is. You can go to certainly training companies out there that have online training. For instance, if you never see your employees because they're always on the road, they can log into online training, and you could pick some, generic programs. Certainly, power tools, hazard communications for handling chemicals, lockout, energy control, electrical safety. All those things are available in 20-minute. Log into a website, take the training, even answer if you want to get really fun. You can have your employees take tests, and you keep records of all that. And OSHA really loves those kinds of things because it's a very nice, easy way to keep track of all your employees and their training.
Okay, and then that's the last question I have that popped up. Is there a certificate of compliance that after you watch all these videos, or you make sure you have all this stuff that OSHA, issues, that you can post in your office that shows you're OSHA compliant? Or is that really
it's actually something that's ongoing? So it's because certain trainings are required to be done annually, certain ones are biannual or every 3 years. So again, when we do training, we provide certificates and cards and things like that, but it's something that it's not a destination. You're not just going to finish and be OSHA compliant. You're going to continue on forever.
Okay.
Yeah, a couple things I'll point out on that. One, the OSHA website's pretty comprehensive, and they have a lot of videos and training guides and things like that. But although you may not get a certificate of compliance, I would certainly advise people to do what they can to review some of these laws, make sure they're in compliance with OSHA, because if you weren't, and let's say you were sued and there was some issues there and you never have done anything to review OSHA to make sure you were in compliance, that could be an issue down the road. So certainly good to just kind of review that, make sure you've been to the website, and if there's some videos that are in your area, I would encourage you to watch them.
We always recommend multifaceted training. So again, some things are best in person. A good employee orientation before you put somebody to work, because a lot of the standards, the training is required before initial exposure. So having that really good orientation before you put somebody in the field is very important, and then ongoing training after that. And again, this is, as it's already been said, can be accomplished in person, online, read and learn, just depending on where your workforce is. Companies like us can help put that together.
Okay, I do have one more question. Sorry, it's just a follow up to you, Shannon. You had said that most of our risk would be driving a vehicle, and then you said training, before they actually start. So many of our vans or trucks carry Freon tanks and other types of chemicals. Are there any special safety rules or regulations that would cover this, or that they need to take into consideration?
Standards for compressed gas and the HAZCOM standard, which covers any hazardous materials and chemicals. So they would be required to have a written program for that and training. Safety data sheets for the Freon, and some of the newer Freons are explosives. So there's some very specific requirements for those as well. They're required to be secured inside the vehicle so that they don't roll around, and if the valve cap gets hit a certain way, they can go boom. So there are requirements for that. And there's also DOT requirements that may apply depending on the size of the vehicle as well.
Yeah.
So, and so DOT is a little bit different than OSHA. And so they need to be aware they're probably covered by both.
So, hey, I know we're coming up close to time, Sarah, but I had just based on the questions that were submitted and the audience that you guys and gals are speaking to today, if you had to pick one or two areas to focus on from your expertise, your experience, I'll start with Josh. What would your advice be to a small, medium, or a large service and parts organization? So one or two areas that you'd say, you know what, I know your business model, I know what you're focused on, I know your customer base, I would hit these two things. Josh.
Yeah, I mean, I think we just covered it. I think that would, what I've heard from what's going on and what these guys are normally doing, certainly if you're carrying around dangerous materials, you're bringing that into people's homes, you need to make sure you know what you're carrying. You need to make sure you know how to comply with the law and make sure that you're not doing anything illegal, or make sure you're not carrying anything or over certain sizes and things like that. So that's a major area that I would certainly think that you would want to focus on in this industry.
Okay, Josh. Shannon, what are you thinking? One or two areas you hit?
For me, the electrical safety and control of hazardous energy. So making sure that people are not exposed to live energy. We've had cases where people installing things have been electrocuted and had fatalities. So electricity's not good if handled improperly.
All right. Alan.
Yeah, I agree with my other panelists. Certainly hazard communications, injury management.
And having a kind of a nice little package to wrap around it saying this is our health and safety program. And these are the things we talked about the possibility of getting a little closer to some of your members to get a better feel for all the different things. But certainly chemical management, what to do if there's an injury, fleet management, driving and driver's licenses, and making sure people have clean records. That becomes, we're kind of moving away from OSHA towards risk management and the insurance part of it. But I think with a little bit of also the programs mentioned in terms of DOT and what you're transporting, but also the electrical safety, I think, and chemical management are the big ones.
Okay.
That would be my first surmise.
Okay. Any more submitted questions, Sarah, by chance? Anything come in?
Yeah, I have just little technical ones. So
Perfect.
if you have to keep a log, if you have more than 10 employees, does the owner count as an employee if you have, let's say, 9 and the owner, or 8 and 2 owners? Does that count? I mean, I know it's kind of a technicality, but how does that work in legal aspects? Okay.
I would count.
I would agree.
I would too. That's
always err on the side of caution.
Yeah, I would.
Yeah, perfect.
All right.
Well, I have read the questions that everyone submitted. So, Steve, if you don't have anything else, I think we are.
Yeah, no, and thank you, Josh, Shannon, and Alan. Really appreciate the expertise, the time as well this evening as well, too. So thank you. And Alan, it's dark, but we can still see you. It's okay.
There you go.
I got you.
Yes, thank you so much for your time tonight. Thank you to Steve. I know, Shannon, you traveled today, so we thank you for your time, and Josh and Alan as well. And we look forward to seeing you guys again. And then we also look forward to seeing all of our attendees very soon.
Got it. Well, thanks, everybody.
Okay.
Have a good night.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Bye. Yes, thanks.